628-2205.
For recounting some of the things that have happened in our past and giving us a wonderful vision of where this state's headed.
Next, from Topeka, Kansas, a State of the State address by Republican Governor Bill Graves. Currently serving on his first term, Mr. Graves was elected last November. His speech runs about 35 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, members of the Kansas Legislature, and fellow Kansans. It's my pleasure to return to this chamber for the State of the State address. It was my honor to be with the members of the legislature on 8 such previous occasions, seated as the Secretary of State. There are many motivations for wanting to become governor. Not wanting to set through another State of the State message is certainly one. I appreciate your role as lawmakers, for the responsibility to consider and craft legislation is vested with you. As governor, I have the opportunity to initiate and implement legislation. Together, we can engage in the rigors of debate and determine the course of our state. It is an honor to have this opportunity to discuss with you my thoughts as I begin my service as governor. I am pleased to report to you that the state of the state is sound. Although many challenges confront us, we remain a state with low unemployment, with incomes which have grown faster than the national average. Our Regent universities continue to garner regional and national honors. Our agricultural production remains the envy of the world, and our manufacturers' market is the world. As Kansas enters her 134th year, she remains vibrant and full of promise. Carl Becker wrote in 1910 in his work Kansas, "Idealism must always prevail on the frontier, for the frontier, whether geographical or intellectual, offers little hope to those who see things as they are. To venture into the wilderness, one must see it not as it is, but as it will be. We too are on a frontier of our own heritage. It's driven by the pioneer spirit of self-reliance, limited government, personal responsibility, and strong sense of community. Kansas government must return to that heritage, and those principles are embodied in what I present tonight. Becker calls on us not to remain as we are, but to strive for what we can be. What I offer you is just the beginning of a journey to rediscover our own heritage. I must be candid with you. This rediscovery will not be easy. It will threaten those who have gradually grown disconnected from these frontier ideals. It will burden those who blindly believe that government is the solution to all problems. It will frighten those whose interest in self outweighs their interest in the public good. An essential element is a government willing to do more with less. To accomplish this, we must examine not only what government does, but how it does it. Some may argue we have too much government, or some too little. Some may argue we have too much government, regardless of which position. Whatever position you hold, it is clear we have the wrong kind of government. it is equally clear that we need a better government. In my administration, reinventing and results. That is the commitment. That is a commitment I have received from each member of my cabinet, and it is a commitment which will be fulfilled. Among the most important duties of a governor is to develop our state budget. The legislature's single greatest task each session is to consider the budget submitted. Doing more with less is reflected in my budget proposals. I have embraced the concept of performance budgeting, a process that requires, as policymakers, we discard business as usual. In the coming days, I will submit bipartisan legislation that will advance the concept of performance-based budgeting. Instead of incrementally layering program on top of program and adding new funds to every existing program, this legislation will implement two new budgeting concepts. First, let's determine whether funds spent on a program are actually accomplishing the stated goals of the program, a results-based analysis. Second, let's have the courage to kill off obsolete programs that aren't needed, aren't successful, are getting... We have programs that aren't needed, aren't successful, and can be performed better by someone else. I am asking that we do the unthinkable. Let's turn the lights out on state programs that just don't work. Let's strip away old, ineffective layers of government, and in doing so, free up revenue which can be invested in programs that do work, or simply return the money to the taxpayers of Kansas. I challenge each of you to engage in a mission. If you find government programs or agencies incapable or unwilling to use government resources effectively to produce results, let's turn out the lights and thereby focus our limited resources on those programs designed and administered to produce results. My cabinet and I will do the same. Our budgeting process must also be more accountable to our state's citizens. Smoke and mirrors in budgeting clouds government's real size. We must commit ourselves to truth in budgeting. We must stop hiding the real size of our state workforce by labeling employees as special projects officers when in fact they're full-time employees. Currently, the state has close to 43,000 full-time employees, but another 2,000 are on the payroll designated as special project officers. To end this practice, I've directed that two steps be taken. One, for the first time, the budget clearly reflects the total number of workers employed by the state. Two, an agency-by-agency review will clarify the need for each position. When nearly 5% of state employees are special projects officers, that's too many special projects. However, those that should be retained will be. Those that can be justified as full-time should be, and those that ought to be abolished must be. The state will spend more than $1 billion on employee salaries and benefits, $811 million in general fund revenue. To control state spending, we must commit ourselves to the optimum use of each public employee and carefully control the size of the state workforce. Tonight, I am asking the legislature and its leadership for a commitment to abolish one full-time position for every new full-time position you create. My commitment to do more with less is reflected in budget recommendations which reduce the state workforce by 152 positions. Over 4 years, this reduction will save the state $15 million in salaries and associated benefits. This is a good start, but we must do more in further restraining the growth of government. I have taken a strong first step by reducing the number of state employees. I ask now that you take a strong step as well by not adding any. I am recommending you submit to the people a constitutional amendment to limit the growth of state spending to no more than the rate of growth of Kansans' personal incomes. Kansas families must live within a budget which reflects economic reality. Kansas government should also be similarly constrained. This constitutional amendment would impose the necessary institutional discipline to achieve the goal of doing more with less. To those who argue this is too rigid, I would say to you, because those arguments did not prevail against Alf Landon's caste basis law in 1933, Kansas today enjoys the status of having no deficit. Those arguments did not prevail then, and they should not prevail now. I look forward to working with you to frame the specifics of this legislation and to guide its passage. The budget I propose tonight, however, is not subject to such a constitutional amendment, but discipline has been exercised nonetheless. My budget provides for spending at a rate less than the rate of growth in personal incomes. I am challenging the legislature to adopt this discipline and to voluntarily impose a similar cap on growth in state general fund expenditures. My budget will preserve a balance equal to 8.5% of the state general fund at the end of fiscal year 1996. This balance is approximately $36 million more than we are required by current law. I have recommended this ending balance in excess of what is required to plan appropriately for projected shortfalls in fiscal year 1997 and to provide financial stability throughout the 4-year plan I have developed. Creating a 4-year plan is a departure from previous administrations, but I think it is important the state of Kansas, just like Kansas families and businesses, has a realistic financial plan. By taking a long 4-year view, drastic spending cuts which could adversely impact essential state services can be avoided. These significant cash balances will represent a great temptation. Some of you will want to spend this money on new or enhanced programs. Others may wish to cut taxes in addition to those which I will propose. Without compensating spending cuts, either action is inappropriate and, to me, absolutely unacceptable. While the fiscal year 1996 budget is sound, previous years of state spending more than it takes in has created a severe financial problem for us in FY97. I have strong feelings about the appropriate level of spending, and I have strong feelings about the appropriate level of ending balances. I will not allow us to conclude this legislative session with a fiscal year 96 budget that creates a fiscal year 97 crisis. That wouldn't be sound fiscal management, good government, or fair to the taxpayers of Kansas. Truth in spending also requires that funds designated for economic development initiatives actually be spent for that purpose. When Kansans amended the Constitution to provide for a lottery, they did so with the knowledge that a vast majority of lottery receipts would be dedicated to economic development initiatives. In the years following approval of the lottery, the state began using part of the EDIF funds for other than pure economic development purposes. It's time to end that practice. My budget recommendation protects the integrity of the fund and restores spending to projects which focus on economic results. Money is provided for a venture capital fund for technology-based firms and a regional microloan fund for loans to entrepreneurs and small businesses. This one-time state investment of $6 million will attract private and federal investment of more than $32 million for growing small businesses. I'm also recommending a substantial increase for the Kansas Economic Opportunity Initiatives Fund. The importance of this fund was underscored by its role recently in the announced Cessna aircraft expansion. In addition, I have proposed a fund to create a matching pool that generates federal dollars for strengthening our university's basic research capacity. This is coupled with increased funding to translate that research into business and job creation. A vital component of the economic strength is a quality highway system. My budget fully funds the current highway plan. To plan for the future, I have asked the Secretaries of Transportation and Commerce and Housing to work with you in developing a strategy for the next generation of highway improvements. My administration will also be vigilant in the management of public funds. The laws relating to investment of public funds should be reviewed and strengthened as necessary to ensure all investment of taxpayer dollars be done in a prudent and safe manner. In addition to being good stewards of public funds, we must also structure our tax policies to ensure fairness and competitiveness. Tonight, I am calling for the repeal of two taxes which are an impediment to economic development and our ability to attract, retain, and create jobs. I am asking the legislature to repeal the sales tax on services used in new construction and the sales tax on utilities consumed in production. And I hope I get to finish my speech before you conclude your work on those two items. My four-year budget plan can be fully funded without the need to increase general taxes. But a word of caution, this conclusion is conditional. Major changes in the way the federal government chooses to fund mandated programs and new spending initiatives by this legislature can easily fuel the need for new revenue. Make no mistake, I do not want any legislation which increases the general tax burden on the citizens of Kansas. More taxes and less jobs isn't my idea of doing more with less. Tax fairness must be a part of our tax structure. To that end, I'm calling for a decrease in the unemployment taxes paid by Kansas employers. Actual unemployment rates have produced a significant surplus in the unemployment tax pool. Therefore, I recommend reducing unemployment taxes by $43 million in fiscal year 1996. This reduction will not affect benefits, but will allow Kansas businesses to reinvest in producing new jobs. Also, we must address the excessive rates at which we impose taxes on automobiles in Kansas. I pledge my cooperation in achieving a solution to this inequitable situation. But let me say quite candidly, I won't stand with those who would trade fiscal responsibility for political expediency. Let's find a solution and not just play politics with a very tough problem. In some cases, Kansans are paying taxes which never reach state coffers. It is estimated that as much as $60 million each year in taxes on gasoline and diesel fuels are not remitted to the state. This fraud will not be ignored. We're going after crooks who take taxpayer money and put it in their own pockets. I'm recommending initiatives that will ensure existing laws are vigorously enforced and that Kansans' tax dollars are not siphoned away by dealers who cheat. I am announcing tonight, to the extent permitted by law, a 6-month moratorium on the issuance of rules and regulations. Any exceptions for public health, safety, or other considerations will require my personal approval. I will direct each cabinet agency to review all current rules and regulations with a view to eliminating those no longer needed. I have further directed my cabinet secretaries to refrain from issuing any rules and regulations in the future until costs to individuals and businesses can be measured against the benefit to the state. Along those lines, last year this legislature passed a private property rights bill which was vetoed. If passed again this year, it won't be. I've always believed the government that works best is the government closest to the people it serves. Local officials are elected by and are accountable to the same voters who elected us. With this in mind, I am recommending that the property tax lid on cities and counties be allowed to expire, and that legislation to repeal individual levy limits be passed. This measure will allow municipalities to plan their budgets, without the state looking over their shoulders. As part of this proposal, I'm recommending that growth in general state aid to cities and counties be limited to no more than the rate of growth in the State General Fund. State General Fund spending, and that the 10th year of subsidies to counties for reappraisal, which was originally planned for 3 years, be eliminated. This less paternalistic approach gives the elected leaders of cities and counties, held accountable by the voters, the ability to establish priorities and develop revenues to fund their priorities. Our future as a state will be secure if we guarantee every Kansan, regardless of background, that they have access to a world-class public education. By declaring the School Finance Act constitutional, the Supreme Court has confirmed our shared responsibility for establishing school funding. My budget provides Kansas schools with an additional $47.5 million in new money. This includes my recommendation to increase the base budget per pupil by $30 to $3,630 per pupil. Further, I am recommending the declining provision of the local option budget be eliminated, which allows all school districts to share in my recommended increase. My recommendations also include an additional $8.3 million for special education. Although my budget recommendations provide significant enhancements for elementary and secondary education, money should never be the focus of educational policy. We must insist that our schools be accountable to the people they serve. I have provided for continuation of the state's assessment program in which students are annually tested in such basic subjects as reading, math, and writing. Also provided is funding for the State Board of Education's efforts to help schools implement reforms and improve student performance. We need to know how schools are doing. Working together with the education community, I will establish a report card for Kansas schools. If we are funding for performance, we must measure performance, schools as well as students. To be truly competitive in the world economy, we must maintain an excellent system of higher education. My recommendations include $453 million from the State General Fund for the Regents system, plus reasonable increases for salaries and other operating expenditures. Additionally, I have funded a new minority graduate student fellowship program to attract high-ability students to our graduate programs. My budget recommends funding the second phase of the Regents Library System-Wide Access Plan. This plan gives users on each campus the ability to access all collections. A diversity of higher education is critical and is reflected in my recommended increased state aid for vocational technical schools and the full rate for community colleges. Training the state workforce to ensure Kansans and Kansas businesses stay competitive in the evolving international market is another key to the long-term health of our economy. I commend the legislature and prior administrations on the comprehensive training programs designed to meet this need. The Kansas Industrial Training and Retraining Programs, the Skill Program, the High Performance Firms Incentive Program are examples that have been created in recent years. My budget strongly supports the continuation of these investments. We must recognize and reward state employees who are truly committed to serving our customers, the people of Kansas. My budget includes salary adjustments associated with movement on the classified pay matrix and longevity payments, as well as a 1% cost of living adjustment. An equivalent 3.5% salary increase is funded for all unclassified employees, including elected officials, judges, and Regents faculty. But simple pay increases is not enough. For too long, our antiquated system of budgeting has practically forced our state employees to spend money at the end of the fiscal year which might otherwise have been saved. This use it or lose it mentality has got to come to an end, and it will. I am recommending legislation which allows those agencies that have begun implementation of Kansas quality management to use 1/2 of the budgetary savings resulting from quality initiatives and new efficiencies in the delivery of services to make incentive payments to employees in that agency. These funds will also be used to provide training in KQM principles or to purchase technology to achieve even greater savings and greater customer service. It is cost efficient to reward outstanding performance. Ethics in government is the bond between those governed and their representatives. For years, elected officials have talked about ensuring that campaigns are run appropriately. On paper, the requirements have been tightened and additional elected officials have been brought under the purview of the Kansas Commission on Governmental Standards and Conduct. However, without the staff to monitor and review candidate financial reports, these laws are not fully effective. For fiscal year '96, I am recommending that additional resources be allocated to ensure compliance with our state's existing laws. Strong ethics legislation ensures that the people's interests and not the special interests will determine our policy choices. I am ready to work with you to make certain our ethics laws suitably protect the integrity of our government institutions and the people served by them. Additionally, I would ask you to bring the governor and all statewide elected officials under the same restrictions for accepting campaign contributions during the legislative session, which applies to those of you in the legislature. Legislation passed last year reinstating the death penalty and authorizing the civil commitment of sexually violent predators has already begun to impact proceedings of the state's local prosecutors. My budget includes funds for an assistant in the criminal division of the Attorney General's office. This person will specialize in death penalty and sexual predator proceedings and provide assistance where needed to county prosecutors. A specialist in these proceedings will ensure laws are properly enforced. We will continue to monitor these proceedings to ensure adequate support is available to local law enforcement. I'm also recommending funding to allow the Kansas Sentencing Commission, under the authority of the Kansas Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, to develop a plan for the establishment of an integrated statewide criminal justice information system. Our juvenile justice system is in need of serious reform. We must isolate young violent criminals from other juveniles in the system. I pledge to work with you in crafting those reforms. To improve the quality of life for Kansas families and provide greater choice in their care options, my recommendations promote policies that provide home care in addition to nursing home and institutional care. I support expansions of community services for elderly and disabled Kansans. My recommendations include additional funds for both of these populations to receive services through the Home and Community-Based Services Medicaid waiver program. Also, my budget recommendations contain funding for continuing implementation of Senior Care Act services provided through the Department of Aging. Mental health reform has provided the opportunity to reduce reliance on large state hospitals. I support this policy, and my recommendations include funding of the final year of program expansion envisioned in the original mental health reform legislation. Clearly, with the $7.8 billion budget I have submitted, there are important programs that I have not mentioned in this message. What I've attempted to do is to highlight the diversity of programs contained within my budget. In closing, let me remind you again of Carl Becker's words on the frontier. Idealism must prevail. This message is not about mindless budget slashing and cutting. It is not about across-the-board reductions. Programs that are not proving themselves will not be supported, while programs that are critical to our future will find strong and often increased support. There will be innovations for cost-cutting and saving. There will be new concepts of budgeting. There are new program initiatives. This new administration looks forward to working with you, drawing upon our heritage as a foundation for change. Thank you all very much.
During the month of January and February, we plan to air Governor's State of the State speeches and inaugural addresses from across the country. Call our viewer hotline to find out the air times at area code 202-628-2205.
Thank you.
Next, from Annapolis, Maryland,